The final stage in making your bowl will be to sand it and apply a suitable finish. So in this video I'm going to talk about the sanding principles and some of the finishes that I use. Sanding can be done either by holding a piece of sandpaper in your hand or using a mechanical advice. For the hand sandpaper, you would take a cloth-backed paper and fold it in three. This helps to reduce the amount of heat that will come off the work and into your hand. The cloth-backed paper is superior to others because it will mould more to the shape of the vessel as you're doing your sanding. With mechanical devices, you have things like the Skilton Sander, which is a spinning disc on a bearing that will rotate as the work turns. It will cause it to rotate. This helps to reduce sanding marks into the work. Or there is power sanding, where you're going to fit the device into a power drill and work it against the middle. This works particularly well in the middle of a bowl where there is less angular rotation of the piece. So as I said, you would fold the paper in three for hand paper to work it across the surface. Lathe speed, fairly slow, around 400 or 500 RPM, allows the paper to work the best and then move it in a smooth motion across the lathe. The grit size of the paper that you will start with is sort of a function of how rough the surface would be. Usually you're starting at 80 grit, but if the surface is already quite smooth, there's nothing wrong with starting at 120 or 180 grit. The first paper that you use is doing all the work, and any subsequent grades that you work through is just removing the sanding marks from the previous grade. Whatever the starting paper is, halve it and add that to it for the next one. So in this case, we were starting with 120 grit, so we add 60 to it to end up with the next grit being 180, and so on, working through. So 180 then becomes 270. But there is no 270 grit, so you have to either go back to the 240 or up to 320. Normally you'd probably go to 320. Next available grit after that is 400, 600, 1000, 1500. In most bowl work, I like to try and go as far as 1500 to get that beautiful smooth finish on the surface of the bowl. The safest place to sand the inside of a bowl is between the 6 and 9 o'clock positions. This allows you to control the sweep of the sandpaper across that section of the bowl and reduce any risk of it being grabbed and flicking your hand and the paper all the way around the inside of the bowl. Can be a bit nasty. So sanding between the 6 and the 9 position with the lathe running at a slower speed of around that 400 or 500 RPM should provide you with a sufficient working space to allow the sandpaper to work at its maximum efficiency. A very important safety tip when sanding is to wear a mask, because you are producing very fine particles of timber that you do not wish to have enter your lungs. So please wear a mask for your own safety. There are many finishes that you can use to complete your project, and the type of finish that you use can often depend on the use of the vessel. For example, is it something that requires a food-safe product because you're going to use it to eat out of? Perhaps it is something that needs a full gloss finish, and something like the glow will produce that for you. There are other products that you can use that will go in between the two on the gloss range, but I'm just going to talk about a couple of the products that I've been using. One of the most important things about applying a finish is that less is always better. If you put too much product onto the work, you'll end up with a streaky finish. There are two main preparation products that I will use depending upon the type of finish that I'm going to do. Sanding sealer if I'm applying an oil finish, or Triple E for a wax or polish finish. Mostly I seem to be using Triple E. These products help to seal the pores of the timber, allowing the wax or oil to more take evenly to the timber. The sanding sealer will make the timber fibre stand up. A single sweep of the last used sandpaper grade is all that's required to reduce those fibres back to the smooth finish. So for applying my finishes, I'll use a quality kitchen paper towel, but never wrap it around your fingers. That's just asking for something to catch and damage yourself. So looking at the sanding sealer, which I'm going to apply to the inside of this bowl, put plenty of product on the paper towel and work it in a circular motion so that it's getting into all of those pores. You can see the colour change is helping me determine where I still need to apply the product. That's done. We just need to let that dry a little bit so that we can then use that final grit of sandpaper just to clean off any of those fibres that have been raised across the work. So for the outside of the bowl, I'm going to use Triple E so I can put a wax finish on the surface as distinct from the inside of the bowl, just to show the different examples. With the Triple E, I'll apply it again with the paper towel by rubbing it into a circular motion to make sure that it gets into all the pores of the timber. Now that I've finished applying that to the piece, I can turn the lathe on and run it about 12 to 1400 and then work it in there so that it's giving a nice even take to those pores of the timber. So you can see by working that Triple E that I have already come up with a bit of a sheen onto that timber. When I apply the wax on top of that, that's really going to highlight that even further. My preference for applying a wax finish is the glow. I just like the level of shine that it gives. Again, I'm going to apply that to the surface with the paper towel, only using a very small amount to evenly coat the surface, and then we'll buff it up with the lathe running. I can already feel that I've got the surface properly coated because the paper is grabbing a little bit. So now let's burnish that up to get that shine going. In this case, I do not want to move to a separate part of the paper because I'm trying to get the heat into there to create that polish effect. And you can see the result on the paper where it's burnished up onto the paper, and now I have this beautiful full gloss finish on the bowl. So let's look at applying an oil finish to the inside of this bowl. Because oil finishes can be a bit messier, I like to wear a pair of gloves, but that's a personal preference for me. And the two main oil finishes that I would often use are either the Liberon finishing oil or a Danish oil. I think I'll use a Danish oil in this instance. So I'll dampen the paper towel fairly liberally, and again we're going to apply it in a sweeping motion. Now we go and have a cup of coffee, but leave it sit till it feels dry and then we'll burnish it up. So now that it's dried reasonably well, we can still burnish it up the same as we were doing the other finishes. So in this instance, we've only got like a satin type finish. Maybe a bit longer drying time and certainly a second coat will allow that to come out in the amount of shine that I've got. So often with an oil, you can have a better control over the amount of shine or gloss that you want out of the finished piece. One of the other principles you can have is that, particularly on an oil finish, if you're not completely happy with the concept, you can put a wax finish over the top. The basic principle is you can put wax over oil, not the other way around. The way I remember that is that W comes after O in the alphabet. So to me, W after O, wax on oil. Thank you for watching and happy turning.